What is up, everybody? I just wanted to share my year in books. So I have here the list of books that I read this year. I read a total of 76. My goal was 75, so beat it by one. My goal was 50 nonfiction and 25 fiction. And so I just want to walk through each of them. I'm not going to talk about every single book, but I want to hit some of the highlights. And I'm going to get started with the fiction because I figure most of my friends would probably prefer to hear about the fiction than a lot of the boring theology and history books that I read throughout the year. So I'll start with the fiction, then we'll go to the nonfiction, and then I'll give you a look at what I'm planning on for 2023. Happy New Year, by the way. So I started the year, I ended last year by reading The Hobbit again by J.R.R. Tolkien. And I did that by listening to a recording that I found on Spotify. Very, very good fan made, I found out after the fact. Fan made audiobook, unabridged, of The Hobbit. And then after I finished it, I found out the same fan had really well created the same audiobooks for the rest of the series. And so I read the whole Lord of the Rings series to start the year off with those excellent recordings. They were really good. They had full scores from the movie in the backgrounds, as well as sound effects and a full cast of characters. So really enjoyable audiobooks. You can find those on Spotify, or I'm sure there's somewhere else online. If you wanted help finding those, just send me a text and I'll help you find those. After I finished those, I wanted to revisit a series of books that I read as a child when I was a kid. I loved these books. So the Dragons in Our Midst series. If you grew up and your parents took you to Lifeway once or twice a week like mine did, you recognize these books and maybe you've read them. It's two series actually that I've got here in front of me. So it's the Oracles of Fire and the Dragons in Our Midst series. So I wanted to reread those this year. It's a pretty long series, and I hadn't read it in over 10 years, and I wanted to see if it held up, and it does not. So great for kids, and it's not bad, but just not the best when it comes to the writing and the story and all that. It's when it comes to older readers, I guess, like myself, it's just not great. So I found by book 5, I was like, just let it end, please. But at that point I had to finish the series out. So, and I'm glad I did. It was good to revisit childhood memories in the Dragons in Our Midst series. Christian fiction, so it's got some themes in it of God and faith and grace, different things like that. So if your kids are interested, get in touch with me. I'll be happy to. These are mine, so I'll be happy to loan them to anybody. If your kids like it's dragons, fighting, swords, the whole thing. So if they're interested in that, I'll be happy to let them borrow that. So that's that series. After that, I wanted to read well, you see there, I read The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis. I read a couple books by C.S. Lewis this year. That one was not my favorite, but anyway, I don't have much to say on it. After that, I wanted to read the Dune series because I've heard a lot of good things about Dune. The first book, Dune, is excellent. 10 out of 10. One of my favorite books of the year. Highly recommend it to anybody, especially if you like sci-fi, world building, and all of that. The series goes way downhill. So after the first book, it just starts a steady decline and continues to get worse and worse and worse and worse. So books 2 and 3, they're good. Not as good as Dune, but Dune Messiah and Children of Dune, also entertaining reads. But then once you get to book 4, it just goes off the crazy end. And I mean that literally. I think the author, if I understand correctly, his wife died as he was writing the last couple of books, and he went somewhat insane. If I understand correctly, I shouldn't laugh, but if I understand correctly, that's what happened. I had a friend who, as I was talking to him about the Dune series, he said, you can stop reading at book 4. And for my own sake, I didn't take that advice. I wanted to, see how the story ended, see if there was a satisfying conclusion, and see exactly what goes on in books 4 through 6. And he said it this way. He said, I think what he said was, sin does not make literature better. And that is a fact. When it comes to books 5 and 6, there is a lot of very explicit material in it, the sexual nature. It's just not any good. It's not worth reading. So I would say, if you're interested in the Dune series, absolutely read book number 1. Maybe read books 2 and 3, but don't bother with books 4 through 6. They're not worth your time, if I'm being completely honest. The story goes downhill. It gets entirely too graphic, and there's not much action as far as like in book 1, where there was tons of spaceships and fighting, and it becomes very political. It just goes downhill. I don't know how many other ways to say it. So if you want a few more details of exactly how bad it gets, I'll be happy to give those. But the Dune series overall, not great. Book 1, phenomenal. Read book 1. I insist. After I read Dune, I wanted to visit a new series that I had heard a lot about for a long time, a children's series called the Wingfeather Saga. This is the Wingfeather Saga. So 4 books. There is a 5th book, I believe, that I have not read, but it is outside of this main series, taking place in the same world. So maybe I'll get to it this year. We'll see. But the Wingfeather Saga by Andrew Peterson, you might recognize that name, Andrew Peterson. He is a Christian music artist, and he has also written several other books. But you probably know his most popular song, Is He Worthy, has come out in the last couple of years. You probably heard it on the radio, adapted from Revelation 5. One of the best worship songs, I think, in the last 10 years. So that's Andrew Peterson. But his book, The Wingfeather Saga, is very good. It's really good children's literature. I really enjoyed reading through it. Appropriate, obviously, as a Christian writer. It's all good. The themes in it, there's not that much as far as explicit Christian material in it, although the characters will make reference to the Maker, obviously a reference to God, and they will pray to him on occasion. And then in the final book, I don't want to give too much away, but there are a few more explicit references that perhaps point to the gospel a little bit more clearly. So if you're interested in the Wingfeather Saga, they're very good, but it is a little more world building, but on a kid's level. So if that's not your style, that's okay. Don't bother. Taylor tried reading it along with me, and she got incredibly bored because that type of fantasy world just does not appeal to her. So anyway, there is a new series coming out on YouTube, and I believe there's another app that's showing it as well, of the Wingfeather Saga, adapting the books, this first book, On the Edge of the Dark Sea of Darkness. Just clever writing, funny. He reminds me in a lot of ways of C.S. Lewis, but check out the Wingfeather Saga, very good. And then as the year was growing close to the end, I decided I wanted to finally read A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. I'd never read it before. Obviously, it's a part of our culture. We've all seen The Muppet Christmas Carol, and I guess Jim Carrey did a version of it, all sorts of different versions of the Christmas Carol, but I wanted to read it for myself, and I did enjoy it. It was great. And after that, I read The Princess and the Goblin by George MacDonald. I failed to mention up down here on number 18, Phantastes by George MacDonald. Of the two, I preferred The Princess and the Goblin, but the reason I was drawn to these is that George MacDonald was a huge impact. He was a huge inspiration in the life of C.S. Lewis and of J.R.R. Tolkien. So 2 of my favorite authors, and he inspired both of them. So I could see that a little more explicitly in The Princess and the Goblin, although certain elements of Phantastes as well. As far as the story goes, I was much more engaged in The Princess and the Goblin. Phantastes was a little hard to follow at times, I thought, personally, but the writing was beautiful. It was really enjoyable. So if you're interested in those, highly recommend them. And finally, for my fiction, I read Brandon Sanderson, his first book that was published, which was called Elantris. Brandon Sanderson wrote the Way of Kings and the rest of the Stormlight Archive, one of my favorite book series from last year. And I just wanted to go back and read something else by him. Here in the last couple of days of the year, we were taking a road trip, so I wanted to listen to it. So I read it in the last couple of days, and it was pretty good. It wasn't as good as the Stormlight Archive or the Way of Kings, but it was still enjoyable. It was all right. So if you're interested, again, in any of those fiction books, I think I hit on all of them there. Yeah, I don't think I missed any of them. If you're interested in any of those, feel free to reach out. I'll be happy to let anybody borrow my copies or point you to where you can find copies of them. I did listen to a lot of these because I find that I can get through a lot more with an audiobook since I can multitask while I'm listening. So I enjoyed listening to most of these, I believe, this year. The first Dune book I did actually sit down and read a hard copy of. And so again, that's my fiction. They were great. Holler if you have any questions about those. Now on to the nonfiction. And if you're still hanging in there for this, then good for you. You're a boring person like me. No, I'm just kidding. All right, so let me clear this really quick. There we go. All right, so I'm not going to go through each of these book by book, but I've highlighted a couple of them, and then I'll hit a couple of others along the way. So the first one you see highlighted there is The Legacy of Sovereign Joy by John Piper. This is from the book series, The Swans Are Not Silent, or you may have seen it in this this binding, 21 Servants of Sovereign Joy. There are 2 new books, so there is a 27 Servants of Sovereign Joy, but again, The Swans Are Not Silent. And each of these is a biography, short biographies of 3 men in each book. So this first one was Martin Luther, Augustine, and John Calvin. And then I might hit on a couple of the others. Well, I'll go ahead and read. Let's see. My favorite of the series, again, The Swans Are Not Silent, 21 Servants of Sovereign Joy. My favorite of the series, I believe, was The Hidden Smile of God. That was book 2. And it was John Bunyan, William Cooper, and David Brainerd. Just a phenomenal, but I enjoyed the whole series. You can see down here on my currently reading, I am on the last book. So you can see my bookmark there. I am very close. So this will be I guess my first finish of 2023. But very good, and especially for pastors. Or people involved in ministry. This shows you, these men that Piper writes about just give you great examples of godly men and the different characteristics that you can emulate in them. And I think Piper does a great job of breaking down their biographies, but not making them just historical, but actually diving into the practical things that they did and driving and the whole time focusing on God's sovereignty and his glory and the sovereign joy that comes from knowing him. So this whole series, great, phenomenal. You can find audiobooks for those on Hoopla, except for the last one that I'm currently reading. So that's why I'm not finished yet. It's taking me a little bit longer because I got to sit down and read it. But so all of those that are on this list are, I'll go ahead and read those really quick. The Legacy of Sovereign Joy, The Hidden Smile of God, The Roots of Endurance, Contending for Our All, Filling Up the Afflictions of Christ, Seeing Beauty and Saying Beautifully, another one of my favorites, and A Camaraderie of Confidence. So all of those, excellent, by John Piper. Be on the lookout for 27 Servants or 21 Servants of Sovereign Joy. Very good. Let's see. What's some others that I want to talk about? Well, number 15 here is bolded. He descended to the dead. So I actually got this book for Christmas because even after I'd read an ebook copy of it, I wanted a hard copy of it. And I'm very thankful that my mother-in-law got me a hard copy of it, because this one has no markings in it, but the ebook copy of it that I got is marked up all over it. I mean, there is markings on every single page. So very, very good. It discusses that line in the Apostles' Creed, which says he descended to the dead, or he descended to hell. It discusses that, and it really answers the question, I think, what happened to Christ on Holy Saturday? When he died on Good Friday, where did he go? What did he do? What was he doing up until Easter Sunday morning when he rose from the grave? Very good book. So this is my number 2 book for the year. Okay. He Descended to the Dead. Very technical. So lots of Greek, lots of Hebrew in it. Okay. So if those are a little above your head, then it might not be for you. But I will say that you can get through it without those. Okay. It might be a little tougher and you might have to take it a little slower, but you would be able to make it through. And it is just very enjoyable. It's a doctrine that we don't talk about much in, I guess, the Baptist, Protestant, Evangelical Church, but just a really, really refreshing book. He Descended to the Dead, an Evangelical Theology of Holy Saturday by Matthew Emerson. So there's that one. Next was my number 1 pick for the year, What About Evil by Scott Christensen. It's a little bit of a monster. It's pretty big. It's a systematic theology of evil, the problem of evil, and it is a defense of God's sovereign glory. So this takes the problem of evil and it talks about it from a Reformed Calvinistic view, where the free will defense doesn't quite hold up from that specific view. And so this takes with a compatibilistic view of free will, as opposed to a Arminian or libertarian free will, and it puts forward a phenomenal defense of the problem of evil with in regards to God's sovereignty. So this one was excellent. It was also very difficult to read. In many places, the author sought to expose you to the evil that is in the world. And because of that, it was very emotionally difficult to read at times. He gave a lot of details in ways that, you know, I didn't want to read this right before bed. You know what I mean? Just because it was tough. You know, there is evil in the world, but we can rest assured, and I think Christensen makes a phenomenal argument, that God is sovereign over all things, and he has a good purpose even for all of those terrible things. And so we can trust that God is good, and we can trust that he has a plan for our lives and for the lives of everyone in the world. So What About Evil? Phenomenal. It's big. So if this one is a little too daunting for you, let me recommend this shorter one. It's called Why Is There Evil in the World and So Much of It? Not one of my favorites of the year because it was overshadowed by Big Brother, right? But this one, very good. It breaks it down into a much smaller, much more digestible, I guess would be a good word. The same topic. Why is there evil in the world and so much of it? Like, how could a good God allow so much evil? It's good. So if that's a question you have, check out this book, or again, Big Brother, that I loved and one of my favorites. All right. So next was number 22, When the Church Was a Family. This one was just so good. It was so what Hellerman seeks to do, he seeks to ground in his argument the small group society, the large group, strong group society of the early church, and how they truly lived as if the church were their family, as if they were truly brothers and sisters. And so it just lays out just kind of the design of that community. And he says recapturing Jesus's vision for authentic Christian community. That's what he does. I don't agree with Hellerman on everything, but I will say this book was excellent, and it fueled my love for my brothers and sisters in Christ, especially here at my local church at Bethlehem. And I'm so thankful that I see a lot of these, this family idea and these family relationships being built and fostered and grown, even as we go through the year. It's a great book. I'll recommend it again. When the Church Was a Family by Joseph Hellerman. All right. And then I believe finally on my, excuse me, of my highlighted ones, so those were my favorite ones, was The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. I don't have a hard copy of The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, so this is the condensed version of it by Carl Trueman. This is A Strange New World. I didn't read this book this year. I read the big version, but you can find both of them on Hoopla or pick it up at your library, I reckon. And what Trueman does is he seeks to make sense of the modern gender ideology of how did we get to where we are, what's wrong with thinking this way, and where do we go from here. Very good. If you are involved or if you pay attention to our current political climate, you know how far we've come and how scary, especially for the young people in our society, things are. And The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self is a difficult philosophy, a lot of it. It's tracing how this philosophy and this ideology has changed over time and how it's grown and where it started and came from. So it's a little bit of a tough read. You'll need to take it slow. I took it slow. But it is very good. And when it comes to these things, we can't afford to get them wrong, right? We have to be prepared to speak the truth in love. And when it comes down to it, we need to protect those who are in danger and in harm's way. So those were my favorites of the year. So let me pull those back up really quick. Excuse me. I've also been sick for a good bit of the year, it feels like. So probably taking it in order. Number 1, What About Evil? Number 2, He Descended to the Dead. Number 3 was probably one of the ones from here. The Hidden Smile of God was especially one of my favorites. Seeing Beauty and Saying Beautifully, also very good. So we'll say the 21 Servants was number 3, but we're counting that as 6 books, okay? 7 if you count the one I'm reading right now. And then 4, When the Church Was a Family. And 5, Stand In for the Rise and Triumph of Modern Self. So those are the fiction ones, those are the nonfiction ones. And here's some of the other ones that I read through the year. These are the ones that I had hard copies of. But if you're interested in any of those, happy to share. I'm trying to think if any of these I want to remark on. I read Knowing God by Packer for the first time this year. Some people are going to be angry at me, but I was not particularly impressed. I will say that I know how influential Packer has been on all of the other people that I've read. And so I saw elements of his writing. I felt like I'd read it before because I've just seen it in so many other places because he was so impactful on all the men that have influenced me. So don't be mad at me that I didn't just love the book Knowing God by J.I. Packer. I also read Evangelism and the Sovereignty of God. I have it over there, but I forgot to pull it over here. And it was also very good. A little disappointing. I thought he could have dealt with the healthy tension between the two, evangelism and the sovereignty of God. I think he could have dealt with it a little more thoroughly, but it was an enjoyable read nonetheless. Let's see, any of these other ones that I want to say a word about. I reread Sing by Keith and Kristen Getty. I was going through that with one of the boys that I'm discipling, and Just love that book. Great introduction to worship. Check it out if you haven't. The Gospel for Disordered Lives. I didn't read all of it, but I read the vast majority of it. And I will say it is a great manual for biblical counseling. So if you're interested in doing any biblical counseling, or if you have a question about a specific issue and how that relates to biblical counseling, the Gospel for Disordered Lives, very good. It's new this year, I believe. So that is my nonfiction reading. Number 50, I have my ESV Bible reading. I read the ESV this year. Again, a lot of that was listening, and I listened through the ESV app along with Kristen Getty. So that was what I did my Bible reading with this year. But Taylor got me this very nice hard copy of the Bible. You want to come sit with me? Leah's in here, so she wants to come sit with me. And then there's Daniel. Say hi, everyone. We love books. Leah, what was your favorite book that you read this year? You don't know? Okay. Well, that's all right. So, as I already said, I'm currently reading A Camaraderie of Confidence by John Piper. It's the last in the 21 Servants. For 2023, last year my goal was 75 books. I'm going to try to push it just a little bit more to 85. I thought this year was a good amount of books. What, baby?
Don't have any more gummies because he had some at first service.
Okay, no more gummies for Daniel, everyone. So I'm going to try to read 85 this year. I've got it broken up into 30 fiction and 55 nonfiction. Can you go see mommy? Go see mommy. All right. So some of the ones that I want to read this year, I want to read the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson. It's a big series. I think it's 12 books, but I'm not entirely sure. I've never read them before. And then I want to read I'm probably going to start this one actually before it, but the Becoming C.S. Lewis trilogy by Dr. Poe. Dr. Poe is a C.S. Lewis scholar at Union University, and so I've met him a couple of times, but he's got a full trilogy of biographies on C.S. Lewis. I don't have those. I've got those right over here. I insist. So here's books 1 and 2. Becoming C.S. Lewis and The Making of C.S. Lewis. The completion of C.S. Lewis is the third. I don't have a hard copy of it yet, but I've been looking forward to reading these for a while, and so I'm going to try to fit them into 2023. Then you see The Unseen Realm there. I've heard of Michael Heiser, and I've heard a good bit about what his shtick is. Each author has their own, their own hobbies and stuff, but I'm looking forward to finally figuring out exactly what Michael Heiser has to say, seeing where he can inform me and what I can learn from him. So looking forward to it. Next, I have In Quest of the Historical Adam by William Lane Craig. So Dr. Craig, his study of the historical Adam. So you see there. I know going into it that I'm not going to agree with everything that William Lane Craig has to say. I enjoyed his lectures on Genesis. He has some lectures free to view on his website and on YouTube, and I enjoyed them, but I think he takes some of his conclusions a little too far. His deal is really reading Genesis as he uses the genre title mytho-history, and he qualifies that very, very well, I think, but it still has connotations when you mix myth into the name of your genre when referring to scripture, because we believe, and Dr. Craig claims to believe, in the inerrancy of scripture, that this is not a myth, this is the truth. And so it gets into some of that technical definition of the word myth, which C.S. Lewis would say a myth is not necessarily untrue. And he would say that the most true and the greatest myth is the story of scripture. And again, don't let the misconception that as we generally understand myth to mean totally untrue. But again, I'm excited to read this book. I know I'm not going to agree with him on everything, but I'm interested to see exactly what his view is, because I know it's been misrepresented by a lot. After that, let's see, Typology by Dr. Hamilton. Looking forward to that. I've been wanting to read it. I've had it on my shelf for a while. Providence by John Piper. There's that one. They gave it away for T4G last year, so I'm looking forward to reading Providence by John Piper. The Star Wars High Republic series. So I want to read a little bit of Star Wars. I still want to read plenty of fiction this year. You know, it's enjoyable to read fiction for me. And even embedded in those untrue stories are snippets of truth and different ways to help us see our world in a different way. So then we have Simply Trinity by is it Matthew Barrett? Is that it? That's his name? Yes, Matthew Barrett. I've had one of my friends on my back about reading this one, so I'm going to finally honor Seth's request that I read Simply Trinity. Looking forward to it. Kingdom Through Covenant by Dr. Gentry and Dr. Wellum. It's a monster, but I'm hoping to finally make it through. I've wanted to read it for years, but seminary studies wouldn't let me take time to read a book like this. So now that I'm out of school, hopefully I'll have time to read a textbook. You know what I mean? So then a couple of other ones that I've got here, On Guard, just about protecting the church, and especially from abuse and different things like that. So I want to read this one, see how I can be applying it here at our church to make sure we're a safe place and a place that cares for victims and different things like that. So Big Truths for Young Hearts. I'm looking forward to reading this one by Dr. Ware. I bought it before we even had Leah and haven't had the time or the ability to go through it yet. So I'm looking forward to going through Big Truths for Young Hearts. It's about teaching and learning the greatness of God, but for children, for young kids. And then finally, Corporate Worship by Matt Merker. I'm looking forward to reading this one. It's part of the 9 Marks series. I've enjoyed all of the 9 Marks books that I've read, and I can't wait to see what Merker gets into in this book. So you see some hopeful rereads there. I won't go into those too much, but one I will say, the Ted Decker books, that's another one where I'm revisiting books that I read as a kid, and I'm just interested to see if they hold up. I think they will, at least The Circle. I don't know if Chaos will. We'll see. So if you stuck around for this whole video, bless your heart. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it's helpful. I hope you found some reads or some interesting books that you want to check out. If you have a question about any of these other ones, any of the other ones on the list that I didn't speak to, I'll be happy to give you my 5-minute review of any of them. Some great, some not so great. Just because it's on this list does not mean it's a recommendation. In fact, a lot of these would not be recommendations. But again, just reach out if you're interested in any of them. And thanks for watching. See ya.